Tonight's big stories. China releases its own footage of the water cannon incident in Scarborough Shoal and claims the Philippines is going against a so-called temporary special arrangement made back in 2016.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin describes China's actions against Philippine vessels as irresponsible. Austin met with Defense Secretary Gibo Chodoro in Hawaii, together with top defense officials of Japan and Australia.
And former presidential spokesperson Harry Roque alleges that ICC representatives are now in the country and have even spoken with current government officials.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. I'm Regina Lee.
I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Shawn.
China has released its own footage of the recent water cannoning incident at Scarborough Shoal. In an exclusive video released by the Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, the Chinese Coast Guard can be seen blasting the PCG's BRP Bagakai with water cannons. Their report said it was the PCG vessel that conducted quote-unquote dangerous maneuvers and that they were only forced to use water cannons. Now, taking a look at the videos side by side, the water cannon assault from videos taken by the PCG is on your left, and the one from Chinese Coast Guard is on the right. As you can see, the one on the left had a more up-close version because that was taken from the cell phone camera of someone who was on board. And the one on the right seemed to have been taken from a greater distance, right? Sometimes it also comes down to the angling. There we go. So we have a chance to zoom in. Again, the one on the left is the one from the Philippine Coast Guard, and the one on the right is from the Chinese Coast Guard.
That's not all. Beijing is also citing a so-called temporary special arrangement back in 2016, which allegedly allows Filipino fishermen with small fishing boats into Scarborough Shoal. This arrangement also supposedly bars government vessels from entering both the waters and the corresponding airspace of Scarborough within 12 nautical miles. These statements from the Chinese embassy in Manila came in response to a press briefing by PCG's Commodore J. Tariela. Tariela spoke about being able to cross the line and come close within the 12 nautical mile mark of Scarborough Shoal only in the time of President Marcos, which the Chinese embassy construed as an admission of the Philippines, quote, crossing the red line.
Well, Commodore J. Tariela responded to this by saying that he was only emphasizing the fact that the Philippine government does not recognize those lines. He says, and I'm going to quote, "We have successfully proven that it is merely a product of their imagination. It is unnecessary for us to adhere to that line." Tariela also denied the so-called temporary special arrangement. He tells the public not to be influenced or swayed by fabricated stories. And for its part, the Department of Foreign Affairs had this to say.
I think we should put an end to this issue of special agreements. We've already heard so many terminologies. We've heard the issue of a gentleman's agreement. All this talk about special agreements may be muddling the issue. The key issue here is China is actually illegally in our EEZ is undertaking dangerous actions, aggressive actions against our vessels.
Okay, so from a gentleman's agreement, it's now a temporary special agreement.
To status quo agreement, whatever you want to call it. I think Yusek Daza has a point. This area that we're talking about is well within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, EEZ, and therefore that should guarantee us free and safe passage and a ability to exploit the area for resources, for our own economic gain, without harassment, without any sort of maneuvers.
Correct. But we had Commodore J. Tariela on The Big Story the other night, and we did ask about the trigger points or red lines of China, and he did mention that in the previous administration, he did not specify which admin, that there was a 12 nautical mile red line. But in the Marcos administration, they've been challenging that by going closer and closer. So 10 865 nautical miles.
From 12.
Near,
From 12.
yes, from 12.
I guess the assumption there, just for context, is that when you occupy a certain area, supposedly an island, there it does generate that 12 nautical mile kind of like territorial sea. But again, this is a shoal, so it's not an island.
It's a
And
rock,
It's a rock.
essentially, that we're talking about, which does not generate its own sovereign rights.
Actually,
right?
we're not quite. A rock does generate 12 nautical mile territorial sea, does not generate an EEZ.
An EEZ.
But I'm not quite sure if a shoal is classified
As
under
a
a rock. So yun yung medyo parang kailangan natin itanong, clarify.
It's an outcrop. The bottom line, though, is Commodore Tariel has already said that he is emphasizing that the Philippine government does not recognize those lines, right? Again, we're splitting hairs here over so-called gentleman's agreement, over now it's the red lines, right?
The red lines, the
every day
9 dash, 10 dash, 11 dash lines.
Huwag naman 11
It can be recalled that the PCG and BFAR vessels were en route to giving fuel and food to the fishermen in the area. So kumbaga parang para sa mga mangingisda.
It's
parang
shared
ayuda siya eh.
fishing
humanitarian
ground.
mission. Nevertheless, of course, Senator Ontiveros has already filed a resolution calling for a probe, an investigation into this so-called gentleman's agreement. And the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, chaired by Senator Amy Marcos, is also looking into the matter, although, of course, Senator Marcos has voiced her disagreement quite openly with her brother's foreign policy.
Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with his Philippine, Japanese, and Australian counterparts on Thursday to discuss ways to counter China's quote-unquote irresponsible behavior in the Indo-Pacific. The Pentagon has reportedly nicknamed this emerging regional group as the Squad. Mobile journalist Merimon Reyes gives us more details on that. Merimon?
That's right, Gretch. On Thursday, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin held a press conference in Hawaii alongside his Filipino counterpart, Defense Chief Gibo Chodoro. Also present were Japan's Minister of Defense Minoru Kihara and Australian Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles. In that press con, Austin condemned what he described as China's irresponsible behavior in the South China Sea, citing the recent water bombing attack against 2 Philippine vessels in Scarborough Shoal.
You know, we've been very clear to everyone, to include Beijing, that the kind of behavior that we've seen where Filipino crews are put in danger, where sailors have been injured and property damage, that's irresponsible behavior, and it disregards international law.
Austin also reiterated that the U.S.'s commitment to defend the Philippines through their Mutual Defense Treaty.
And I would just say that you've heard me say, you've heard our president say a number of times that our commitment to the treaty is ironclad, and we stand with the Philippines.
For his part, Secretary Chodoro said the Philippines recognizes the need to invoke its rights in the disputed waters. But he says the Philippines wants to ensure that it would not be put in any situation where the Mutual Defense Treaty has to be invoked.
We are very conscious of the fact that we need to assert our rights, but in a manner that safeguards the safety of each and every member of the Philippine Armed Force, which is the principal actor in the area.
During their meeting, the 4 defense leaders discussed the state of security in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as ways to improve and stabilize the current security landscape. The group, reportedly nicknamed the Squad by Pentagon officials, first met in June last year on the sidelines of the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. The 4 nations also conducted joint maritime patrols in the Philippines' EEZ just last month as tensions with China continue to grow. The quadrilateral group is looking to conduct more joint patrols in the coming months to strengthen their forces' interoperability. Gretch?
Right, thanks for that update, mobile journalist Merimon Reyes.
Let's get more insights on the Squad meeting and the growing tensions out at sea. We have with us tonight Professor Rommel Banlaoi. He's the president of the Philippine Society for International Security Studies. Good evening, Professor Banlaoi. I understand you've just come from a long trip. Thanks for making time for us tonight.
Yes, good evening, Gretchen, Shawn, and good evening to all.
Oh dear, you're coming across a little choppy. Can you hear us, Professor Banlaoi?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, let's try this. First off, your general impression of this new squad meeting. They're calling it a squad meeting, defense chiefs of the Philippines, along with its key allies, meeting over in Hawaii.
Well, I'm very alarmed with the formation of this kind of security arrangement because this security arrangement is privileging military action in order to address security issues in the South China Sea. And, based on my understanding of China's security outlook, China will regard the formation of this kind of security arrangement as another way of ganging up against China, and it's part of the strategic encirclement of China. And that's going to worsen the security situation, not only in the South China Sea, but in the whole Indo-Pacific region.
Can it not be argued, though, that what brought this on was the fact that tensions out at sea have been elevated because of China's repeated aggressions?
Well, the situation can be addressed not through regional security grouping, but through constant negotiations of parties. In fact, I'm saddened by the fact that the Philippines is joining the quarrel among major powers in the Indo-Pacific. Japan, U.S., China, and other major powers have their own issues, and we are participating in that quarrel. So I think we need to go back to the position of ASEAN to maintain the principle of Southeast Asia as a region of peace, freedom, and neutrality, and not allowing major powers to make the region as the fulcrum of their major power rivalries. And I'm saddened by the fact that the Philippines is joining that charade. So I'm very alarmed with the current situation now, and putting at greater risk.
Well, Professor, it would seem, at least to any observer, that dialogues lead to nowhere. And I guess that's why things have escalated to this point. Now that we have hit this point where things are really getting a lot hotter, what kind of change in tack can we do? What kind of other negotiations can we do? Or would you suggest maybe some backdoor negotiations, since the official lines are very tense right now? What are our options, really?
I don't buy the idea that the dialogue is going nowhere. The dialogue is the path towards peace. If we reject the process of dialogue, then there's no way for the region but to suffer armed conflict. So if you are impatient about dialogue, then war is the only logical consequence. So I encourage all not to be impatient, and to reaffirm the need for greater dialogue. We need to talk and talk until we manage our differences. So if you stop talking and if you feel impatient about dialogue, then war is the only logical consequence. And I don't like that. I oppose that kind of argument. I oppose that kind of mindset. I don't want to prepare for war in the region. I don't want to prepare for war in the South China Sea. I want to prepare for peace. And peace can only be achieved not through military actions, but through constant dialogue, persistent dialogue. And that is what we need.
But Professor,
we need persistent dialogue. And it's not going no. The main purpose of dialogue to manage differences, and we shall stop talking. We shall stop negotiating until we manage our differences.
Just a quick clarification, Gretchen. When you say the dialogue is not actually going nowhere, Professor, can you enlighten us on
Yeah. That the dialogue is going nowhere. And I said I don't like that kind of idea. Dialogue is needed so that we can reach our goal of managing our differences in order to maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea.
Right, but if you're saying that the dialogue is actually working and it is going somewhere and it's just taking a long time, can you tell us again, just to be clear, where is this dialogue taking place?
No, we already made a lot of achievements in 2019 when we started dialogue in 2016. Remember, the Philippines and China launched the bilateral consult mechanism in the South China Sea in 2016. We started in 2017. And in the span of 2 years, we already made remarkable achievements.
Professor, can you still hear us?
China,
Okay.
yeah, the Philippines and China decided to form working groups to cooperate.
But Professor, isn't the current administration's independent or multi-country foreign policy strengthening our position at the negotiating table? By joining the Squad, it effectively allows China to respect us, therefore, somehow get a fairer deal, a fairer negotiation.
The problem now with the current government refused to talk with China.
Sorry, Professor, you're coming in a little bit choppy. Can you say that again?
Well, the problem refuses to really talk. It's not really thing with China to manage the current government involving policy in order to
Okay.
I think our signal is having quite the difficulty, but he's been saying some interesting things. I'd love to hear from him about the other
Nabitin ako
side.
doon. But we are trying to call Professor Banlaoi again to try to establish a better and clearer connection. But yeah, as he has been saying, dialogue is, still the
it would
best
be good
way.
to hear the other side or the other options that we have, knowing that it has gotten to this point where water cannons have been described as very fatal, bending our PCG vessels' railings. So I hope to have Professor Banlaoi again for that discussion.
Okay, so we still are trying to call him again and contact him again. Okay, Professor, hello.
Yes, good evening.
Okay.
Right.
Great.
We did not at all hear, what you were saying in response to Gretchen's question. If you want to say it again.
Yes. The problem with the current government is that it refuses to really pursue persistent dialogue with China. Things that were done during the previous government. And what the current government is right now is strengthening military relationship with major powers with a lot of issues with China. And for me, that is putting the Philippines at greater risk of conflict with China. But if you look at the issue of the South China Sea, it is an issue of territorial dispute. It is an issue of maritime jurisdictional conflict that can be resolved through negotiations of parties concerned. Now, if we involve other major powers in that, they are not parties to the conflict, and we are involving them in the conflict, and that's gonna complicate the whole situation. And for me, in my own humble opinion, we can only prevent China from what it is doing in the South China Sea, especially in the West Philippine Sea, is by pursuing persistent dialogue with China in order to manage our differences, pursue cooperative undertaking, in fact mandated by the United Nations Convention, the law of the sea. But the problem right now is that both parties in the Philippines are acting unilaterally at the risk of escalating the conflict in the area.
I don't think that's quite accurate. I have to disagree with that. I'm sorry. President Marcos has made, as far as we can tell, huge efforts to try to dialogue with the Chinese side. He made a quite a significant effort from the reports that we're getting, for instance, waiting for Chinese President Xi Jinping at the APEC summit in November in San Francisco just to be able to dialogue with him on the sidelines. It was a very brief meeting. In the end, he says nobody wants to go to war. We need to talk about this. And from the insider reports, what we got was that Chinese President Xi Jinping was cold to him. Right, that was from a report that I believe the Nikkei or the South China Morning Post posted based on intelligence from U.S. ambassador to the Philippine ambassador to the U.S. Babe Romualdez. In any case, there have been efforts, there have been opportunities to dialogue. The DFA, we know as well, is working very hard behind the scenes to dialogue. The lines continue on. We know the Philippine ambassador to China, Jaime Flor Cruz, is also working hard behind the scenes. So I don't think it's quite fair to say that there has been no dialogue. On the other side of it, though, you also have China saying that, yes, we want to dialogue and maintain a conducive environment for peaceful negotiations. At the same time, they continue to militarize parts of the South China Sea. What do we make of that?
Yes. Well, if there are talks happening between the two parties, then the two parties need to come out with an arrangement to exercise self-restraint in conducting unilateral activities that are considered to be offensive against each other. And both parties need to pay due regard to their own national position and stop all these kinds of activities that are inimical to their respective national position. So I think that is mandated by the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea for both parties to come out with an interim agreement to refrain from doing unilateral activities that are harmful to not only to the region but harmful to each other. So I think that should be the direction of the dialogue that we should achieve. You know, that we have to put a stop to this kind of incidents, because if we don't put on hold, if we don't stop this kind of incident, then the situation will only escalate to the point of what I call unintended military encounter at sea. We need to prevent that, because things are preventable. These kinds of incidents can be preventable. So what we need now is preventive diplomacy. And, you know, I want to go back to the previous effort of the government from the time of former President Fidel V. Ramos to the time of former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, where they emphasized the need for development diplomacy in order for the two parties to manage their differences. I think we need to revisit those efforts, you know, to uphold the need for preventive diplomacy and development diplomacy in order to promote cooperation rather than conflicts in the South China Sea.
But how can we expect to negotiate with China in good faith if we see these incidents happening? As to mention, we've never fired a water cannon at Chinese vessels. We have been using BFAR and Coast Guard vessels in our EEZ, and we have been seeing Chinese research vessels in our waters without asking for permission. How can we expect to negotiate in good faith with them?
Well, that can be done. China has done it with Vietnam. You know, Vietnam used to suffer the same fate with China, but Vietnam learned how to deal with China. Now, Vietnam and China are now talking about shared future in their relationship. Well, I think we need to learn lessons from our neighbors from Vietnam on how they are dealing with China. And also, we have to learn lessons from Malaysia. Malaysia also has a problem with China, but Malaysia is getting along well with China. We also have to learn lessons from Singapore and even Indonesia. Indonesia has problem with China over the issue of Natuna, but they are able to manage their business. So if our neighbors can do that with China, why can't we? So there are existing exemplary practices that we can consider, and we just have to pay attention to these exemplary practices for us to manage our differences with China.
All right, but none of those those interrelations with China, with Vietnam and Malaysia, none of those have actually settled the territorial disputes, which is, I guess, if you're talking to Filipino fishermen, all they really want to do is to be able to fish in their traditional fishing ground like Bajo de Masinloc. I believe the previous president, Rodrigo Duterte, that was his main concern, was just to allow Filipino fishermen back into the shoal. To put it simply, this might take longer than our lifetimes to actually settle. But in the meantime, how can we, kumbaga, Professor, what kind of leverage do we have against China at this point to be able to at least get back to a point where we are not harassed out in our EEZ?
Well, let's go back to 2019. In 2019, Philippines and China already agreed to form a joint working group for joint fishery management. You see? So we just have to go back to the previous arrangement, what have gone wrong, and what are the things that we should do in order to overcome the challenges, in order for the two parties to promote joint fishery management. I have written a paper on on the best practices of joint fishery management in Southeast Asia. China and the Philippines should learn lessons from these existing joint fishery management practices. So we can do it because there are existing models that we can consider. So the two parties should pay attention to these exemplary models that we can apply in order to have not only joint fishery management in the West Philippine Sea, but also apply sustainable fishing practices. Because right now, what we are seeing right now in the West Philippine Sea is the sad occurrence of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing activities. Okay. So we can address that through by sustaining the talk on that aspect. So let's go back to 2019. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic put on hold a lot of everything, and we had an election, and we elected a president with different outlook on the issue. So we just have to revisit the things that we have done, overcome the challenges, and and highlight the achievements, and let us not put to waste the efforts that we have done in the past. And these efforts were not done only by President Duterte. It was a product of efforts that started from previous governments, from the time of former President Pedro Ramos to Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Of course, it got worse during the time of former President Noynoy Aquino, and it was reopened again during the time of Duterte. But unfortunately, under the presidency of Bongbong Marcos, it seems that we are reinventing the wheel. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. We have already made a lot of achievements in the past. We just have to take stock of these achievements. And to share with you, I just came from Uzbekistan through the support of Liwayway Marketing Corporation. And you see, Uzbekistan has problems with China, but Uzbekistan has learned how to manage its differences with China, and Uzbekistan now having a very good relationship with China, and China is now part of the overall development now of Uzbekistan. We can also do that. Vietnam realized that. Vietnam realized that, and Vietnam is now promoting shared future with China. Malaysia also realized that. Indonesia also realized that. I have taken the trains from Jakarta to Bandung, funded by China. So the whole Southeast Asian countries are also managing their differences with China because they want to emphasize not conflict, but cooperation. They want development. They want peace. They don't want war. China, and I think that is the direction that we should take as a nation.
Professor, I acknowledge your point about the joint working group. I think it's a good idea. However, in practice, it doesn't seem to work. As an example, in August last year...
Don't be impatient, please. Don't be impatient.
Wait.
Don't be impatient. That
let me
is the path of negotiation.
Let me give you a real example. In August last year, the last time a Coast Guard boat was water cannoned, there existed already a bilateral consultation mechanism. The point of this mechanism is that Philippines and China should be able to call each other immediately to talk about issues arising from the South China Sea, right? DFA said China did not pick up. So DFA said at that moment, They were scrambling to contact their counterparts from China. At that moment, Chinese Coast Guard, Navy, and maritime militia vessels were already firing water cannons at Philippine vessels at Ayungin or Second Thomas Shoal. So, you know, in practice, it doesn't quite work out the way we hope.
Yeah. I studied that problem. I conducted the research on that problem on the hotline of communication. The problem is that both parties failed to synchronize their communication system and also to overcome their respective security concerns about the communication system. So both parties need to talk on how to come out with a better communication system that both parties can use in times of accident or incident or any type of emergency. So they need to overcome that kind of problem. There are existing technical difficulties, and we need to overcome those technical difficulties referring to the hotline of communication. So we need to deal with the problem and not to stop doing the practice. So, because there are technical problems in the communication system, and we need to find ways on how to overcome those technical difficulties.
But can't it be argued that the past administration tried that route already, development with China, getting more loans, investments from China, and so-called agreements with President Xi Jinping? In fact, President Duterte was blamed for the aggressive island building in the West Philippine Sea during his term. Won't we give them enough? I mean, if we pedal on this, won't we give the Chinese room to be a little bit more aggressive?
Oh, well, were you referring to the island building? The island building started during the time of former President Niño Aquino. It started in 2013. And China completed all these facilities in 2016 before President Duterte assumed office. So the whole facilities development of China in the 7 occupied features in the Calayan Iron Group were done between the years 2013 to 2016. I know that because I paid attention to that issue during that time and even wrote several articles about it.
Okay. One quick question.
But the issue now is we need to move forward. What is the move forward? The way ahead in the South China Sea. Way ahead in the China Sea is not way ahead in the China Sea cooperation. We need to go back to the principle of functional cooperation. You know, in the past, that Germany and France were quarreling. They were afraid of each other and making a lot of military preparations in order to deter each other. But now, Germany and France learned how to manage their differences, started cooperating in the area of economics rather than politics. And you know, this economic established the habit of cooperation between the two countries until they reach the level of security community. Now, it is now very impossible to see France and Germany waging war against each other. Then we need to also follow that line of functional cooperation and setting aside conflict, work for development diplomacy, work for prevent diplomacy. So, and eventually, if we establish the habit of cooperation, conflict in the South Sea will no longer be an issue. The same situation that Western Europe are now enjoying now. Western European countries are enjoying now. It's difficult to see Western European kind of situation. And you know, the key was economic cooperation. The key was avoidance. The key was solution. Those are things other preparation. Because if we prepare for what
right. Professor, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, but your line is getting really choppy. We're going to have to cut it for now, but we hope to invite you to the studio one time to talk more about this issue with us. But for now, thanks so much for your insights and time. Philippine Society for International Security Studies President Rommel Banlaoi.
Well, up next, former presidential spokesperson Harry Roque says he has information that high-level Marcos government officials met with ICC investigators during their visit to the Philippines. More details on that when the big story returns. Here on One News.
The House of Representatives has begun its investigation into the alleged violation of its code of conduct by Davao Congressman Pantaleon Alvarez. This is, of course, after Alvarez urged the military to withdraw support for President Bongbong Marcos in a rally. Marian Enriquez has the story.
The House Committee on Ethics on Thursday convened to discuss the complaints received against former House Speaker and current representative of the 1st District of Davao del Norte, Pantaleon Alvarez. Among those was Tagum City Mayor Ray Uy's complaint alleging a violation of the Code of Conduct of the House of Representatives against Alvarez. According to the committee, they found sufficient basis for the complaint. They've since identified 3 grounds for the alleged violation. Firstly, Alvarez's disorderly behavior due to his failure to attend sessions in Congress. Secondly, his libelous or defamatory statements against certain officials in Davao del Norte. And thirdly, the seditious remark or incitement made by Alvarez towards the AFP to withdraw their support for President Bongbong Marcos. The committee emphasized that the handling of the complaint is devoid of any political motivations. That since Alvarez is a known supporter of former President Rodrigo Duterte.
Wala akong politika ho dito. Nagkataon po na inirereklamo ang ating pong kasamahan sa Kongreso ngayon. And the committee has to act on it.
The committee will send a notice to Congressman Alvarez's office, giving him 10 days to respond to the complaint. Once the committee receives Alvarez's answer and explanation, a hearing will be scheduled. According to the Ethics Committee, the investigation should serve as a warning to all lawmakers.
We are bound by the rules, Code of Conduct of the House of Representatives. We have to act appropriately, in public, with respect to our actions, utterances, speeches, because again, freedom of speech is not absolute.
For his part, Alvarez said that he submits himself to the best judgment of the House Ethics Committee. Alvarez previously explained that his statements were just driven by emotions, hence his encouragement for the military to withdraw support from President Marcos. This is related to the rising tensions in the West Philippine Sea. The AFP has also since stated that they will not heed Alvarez's pronouncement and will remain loyal to their commander-in-chief. The Justice Department, meanwhile, has also initiated an investigation into Alvarez's call to the military, examining whether it could be considered sedition or rebellion. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
Former presidential spokesperson Harry Roque, speaking on the One News show Storycon this afternoon, dropped a new bombshell. He says that ICC investigators have arrived in the Philippines and started their investigation into Duterte's drug war. Here's a clip from that interview.
We know also that while the president has verbally said that he will not cooperate with ICC, he has refused so far to reduce that into writing. So we are not discounting actually cooperation, and we are of course ready with all our legal options.
Roque likewise alleged that the investigators met with some government officials while in the country. He didn't name names but left a hint.
Did anybody from government officially cooperate in that investigation?
Natural po, no? Dahil nakapasok yung mga investigador dito sa Pilipinas. So, alam naman natin na talaga naman po nasa ehekutibo ang Immigration Department. No? At hindi naman tinago ng mga tao kung sino sila. No? Kaya nga ni-record na kanilang pagpasok, ni-record na kanilang paglabas. I've only heard on the basis of hearsay, and that's why I'm not in a position to announce it. No? But on the basis of information received, high-level government officials met with the investigators. The second highest government salary classification.
Despite this, Roque says that the Dutertes remain unfazed by the ICC's presence in the country, noting that they will still have to go through Philippine courts in order to arrest the former president if it comes to that.
We really don't care because that's issued without jurisdiction, and also they have to record with Philippine court. Kung nabasahin niyo po yung Rome statute, hindi naman yan motu proprio na dadalhin nila ang akusado. No? Pupunta pa rin sila sa lokal na hukuman.
Second highest government salary classification. Who falls under that?
Salary grade na yun.
Okay, interesting tidbit there.
Oh, another blind item for another day.
Well, in other news, damage to agriculture caused by the El Niño climbs to almost 6 billion pesos. And mobile journalist Francis Orsho has a report.
Crops and livestock continue to bear the brunt of the extreme heat brought by the El Niño. Latest data from the Agriculture Department shows that damage to agriculture caused by El Niño has increased to 5.9 billion pesos by April 30. The agency says over 80,000 farmers nationwide have been affected. Majority of them, or roughly 60%, are rice farmers. Despite this, the DA says there's still no need to declare a price freeze in the country.
Kasi hindi naman buong bansa ay merong apektado ng El Niño. Makita natin mostly yung western section ng ating bansa ang naapektuhan. Kung idadama yung buong bansa na hindi naman apektado ng El Niño, baka magkaroon ng problema doon sa ibang area.
The agency also believes that they were able to cushion the impact of El Niño, noting that some 58,000 hectares of farmland were affected, lower than the 120,000 they initially projected. But for Senator Francis Tolentino, there is a need to implement price control on agricultural products. He adds that there is also a need to declare a state of calamity in the entire country. The senator says these are the best measures to deal with the impact of El Niño.
Ang daming interventions na pwedeng gawin, pero hindi naman natin kayang kontrolin ang El Niño. That's a natural weather abnormality beyond the control of the government. Basta siguro proactive yung ating Department of Agriculture, DTI. Baka mabawas-bawasan, mamitigate po itong effects ng El Niño.
This week, the government's task force El Niño reported that a total of 131 localities across the country have declared a state of calamity due to the El Niño phenomenon. The cities and municipalities under a state of calamity are scattered across 7 provinces. These are Occidental Mindoro, Antique, Sultan Kudarat, Basilan, Maguindanao del Sur, Maguindanao del Norte, and South Cotabato. Mobile journalist Francis Orsho, we are One News.
We're going to pause for a very short break right now, but right after that, COMELEC is looking to ban the substitution of candidates after they filed their certificate of candidacies for the 2025 midterm elections. The details when we return. Stay with us.
Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News.
COMELEC is planning to ban candidate substitution after these candidates filed their Certificate of Candidacy or COC for the 2025 midterm elections. COMELEC Chair George Garcia says he wants to recommend this no substitution policy to the en banc, explaining that this move will help stop the common practice among politicians of voluntarily withdrawing their candidacies and then calling for substitution even after the COC filing period is over. The only exceptions to this ban are candidates who died or were disqualified. The COC filing for the 2025 elections is set on October 1 to October 8, which means if this policy is passed, candidates only have until October 8 or the last day of COC filing to call for substitution.
Huwag na natin pinagbababula yung mga sambayanan. Dapat kung sinong kakandidato, harap-harapan na. I-file nyo na yung candidacy nyo. Huwag na yung mga kunyari na naka-front ka sa ganyan, yung pala, iba pala ang kakandidato.
Of course, he didn't name names, but the most famous example of this is
Former President Rodrigo
Duterte. Exactly.
But I kind of like it because I guess it will maybe make our jobs a little bit more
The policy?
boring. Yeah. It's going to be too clear-cut. We're not going to be waiting around in the newsroom waiting for a surprise substitute candidate. Naghahanap ng excitement. Yung mga corny kinds lang, okay?
In the elections.
In other news, businessman Cedric Lee surrendered to the NBI hours after a Taguig court found him, Dennis Cornejo, and two others guilty of serious illegal detention. Lee, however, has yet to be committed to prison as he suffered from high blood pressure. Earlier today, Lee was supposed to be informed of the court's disposition to determine where he would be detained. But due to his hypertension, Lee will remain in NBI custody over the weekend, with the court set to release its decision on Monday morning instead.
Taantayin natin kung ano magiging order ng korte kung i-commit na siya sa tamang facility. Temporary lang kasi ang facility natin dito sa NBI.
Bucor Chief General Gregorio Catapang, meanwhile, confirmed that they now have custody of the other two accused, Zimmer Raz and Denise Cornejo. Raz will undergo a 5-day quarantine at the Reception and Diagnostic Center of the Medium Security Compound in New Bilibid Prison in Muntinlupa, while Cornejo is in the Correctional Institution for Women in Mandaluyong. Earlier today, the PNP also attempted to serve the warrant of arrest to the fourth suspect, Ferdinand Guerrero, but they were unable to locate him. Lee's camp has already stated their intention to appeal the court's decision to the Court of Appeals. Both the PNP and NBI are urging Guerrero to surrender to avoid further complications in his case.
Yung kaso po niya ay mabigat na po itong kaso po niya that would require yung life imprisonment, reclusion perpetua. Mabigat po ito. Kung patuloy po siyang magtatago po ay it will create more problems than solution on his part.
Walang mangyayari kung tayo ay parating nagtatago. Baka hindi tayo makapag-focus sa ating legal defense or ating legal remedy.
And despite the heat this month, tourists still made their way to Bicol to take part in the region's own version of the Hot Air Balloon Festival. The festival, dubbed Bicol Loco, took place at the old Legazpi Airport in Legazpi, Albay. The event offers a sight of big and colorful hot air balloons against the backdrop of the majestic Mayon volcano. However, hot air balloon flights scheduled earlier today were canceled due to strong winds. But this did not spoil the fun, as there were other flying events to entertain the guests, including a fireworks display, aerobatics, and a drone show. The festival also featured car drifters and skydivers from Latin America, US, and Europe. There's also a lineup of musical performances by famous OPM stars like Bamboo, Sara Geronimo, Eli Buendia, and Jericho Rosales. The festival will continue until the weekend, and hot air balloon flights will resume tomorrow, May 4.
Actually, napakaganda, super sulit, and talagang hindi na sayang yung puyat, pagod na pagpunta namin dito.
Excited kami, lalo na yung mga bata. Excited kaming makakita ng gato kasi minsan lang to sa first time sa Bicol. Worth it. Nihintay ko pa, pero mukhang worth it naman.
Giving Clark a run for its money. We now have two places holding hot air balloons.
It looks pretty unreal, paragliding against the backdrop of Mount Mayon.
So nice.
Right?
Kasi hindi nag-aalboruto yung Mayon volcano.
Actually, nag-aalboruto pa rin siya.
Pero
malayo
safe enough,
naman.
right?
Safe enough. Imagine watching that view though from a hot air balloon.
Imagine the photo.
Imagine the selfies. Okay, before we go, time for our big picture tonight. What you're seeing here are journalists and media groups commemorating this year's World Press Freedom Day in a protest action at the Boy Scout Circle in Quezon City. This year's commemoration is themed A Press for the Planet, Journalism in the Face of the Environmental Crisis. But also today, the Philippines slipped 2 spots to place 134th out of 180 countries in this year's World Press Freedom Index. The annual report said that while the 1987 Constitution upholds the freedom of the press, Philippine law, quote, does not protect journalism or journalistic freedom in practice. From July 2022 to April of 2024, the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, or CMFR, and the National Union of Journalists in the Philippines, the NUJP, recorded 135 incidents of attacks and threats against journalists. This number surpassed the figures from the first 22 months of former President Rodrigo Duterte's term.
So happy World Press Freedom Day to us.
Kaya environment yun, kasi actually I attended the Media Safety Summit and they say that environmental issues are the second most fatal stories to make after war. So worry number 1, second yung environmental issues.
For now, yung takot ko lang dyan, one day if we don't focus on the environment enough, it will be more deadly than war. Tsaka it can take and wipe us out much faster than war can,
Correct.
I think.
Because that's also where there's deep commercial interests, let's just say.
Profit.
In the environment, right? So a lot of these reports that get caught up in, violence, they have to do with land, for instance, right? And ownership of land and
big business.
Big business profiting off the land.
Profiting
Illegal
off
logging,
mining,
deforestation,
deforestation.
The list does not end. Okay.
I thought we said we'd end on a high note.
Happy World Press Freedom Day.
I'm trying to find a way to make cambio and end this on a good note, but I'm kind of...
We did fight girls this week.
We did? We did? Okay, we're gonna end there. That's it for the big story on this Friday night.
We're One News All Sides all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night and a great weekend.